and then he's made his 1, 2, 3 moves. Next, let's talk about damage. Players who take damage are at risk of injury cards and death. If a character dies, that is, the damage they've taken has reached their health, they drop all their exploration items in the room, they return their spells to the appropriate spell decks, and the character is returned to the box. The player chooses a new character from those available, and after this whole turn has been resolved, they place their investigator model in the start location of the map. If there are no investigators to choose from, then the player is simply eliminated. In addition, at the end of the game, after the final objective has been drawn, if an investigator dies at that point, no further investigators can be replaced by them, even if there are more investigator cards remaining. Next, let's talk about horror. Players who take horror are actually at risk of some pretty nasty insanity cards. Characters who are at 0 sanity are actually insane. They continue on playing as normal, but there are some entry cards that can only be played on insane or 0 sanity player characters, and they are really, really nasty. Up to and including attack your own allies or kill yourself. Alright, now let's talk about status effects. Status effects come in 3 flavors: stun, fire, and darkness. Stun tokens affect monsters and players similarly, but differently. If an investigator takes a stun token, it's placed on their sheet. Having any amount of stun tokens, so 1 or more stun tokens, inflicts a -2 penalty on all checks. As a note, this is not -2 for every one, just to be clear. While a player has any amount of stun tokens on their sheet, their action can only consist of 1 movement step. If they took the stun on their turn for some reason, they then end their turn. Stun tokens are removed 1 at a time during the investigator's trade step, during the keeper actions phase. If a monster is stunned, the stun token is played on their stand, and stunned monsters cannot move or attack. Stun tokens for monsters are removed 1 at a time, just like with investigators, at the end of the monster's attack step. So rather than being able to attack, the monster simply loses one of their stun tokens. Next, let's talk about fire. A fire token is placed on the room, and this is a status effect of the room itself, not the characters in the room. However, it definitely affects the characters in the room. Monsters in a room that's on fire take 2 damage at the end of every monster's attack step that they remain in that room. Investigators take 2 damage at the end of their turn if they remain in the room. So once they've successfully completed their turn, if they're still in a room that's on fire, they take 2 damage. If an investigator tries to enter a room on fire, they must actually make a willpower test. If they fail, they take 1 horror, and regardless of the result, they may still enter, similar to horror tests. If you run out of the provided fire tokens, and believe me, this has happened to me before, you can just substitute replacements. These are not a limited resource. And let's talk about darkness. Darkness tokens, like fire, are actually placed by the room's name, and they affect the whole room. Investigators who are in dark rooms take -2 to all checks, and this actually does stack with stun. So if you are stunned in a dark room, you're taking -4 to all your checks. That really sucks. Investigators who choose to use the Explore action must use an additional movement step to do so. So the Explore action actually costs an action and a movement step. So if you cannot provide both of those, then you cannot perform the Exploration action. Investigators that have items that ignore the effects of darkness also cannot be targeted with cards that require a dark room to play. So if a card says must be played on an investigator in a dark room, but they're holding a flashlight, they're not affected by that. And finally, for the investigators, let's talk about their spells. There are several different types of spells, and these are fairly rare in this game, whereas in Arkham Horror, they're actually fairly easy to come by. These are very, very rare. When you have a spell, you essentially are accessing the whole deck for your spell. You only ever have 1 spell card in front of you at any point in time. However, when you've cast that spell, it's returned back to the deck, and the deck is shuffled up. And then you receive a new card. Some of the cards have better results than others, and they have different results based on whether or not you succeed your spell check or you fail your spell check. So again, it's very important that investigators do not look at the back of any of their spell cards when they receive them. Generally speaking, if they succeed on the spell check, it'll usually have some pretty good results for them, and the intended effect will be pretty obvious by what it says on the front of the card. So again, after the spell's effect has been satisfied, the spell is discarded back to the spell deck, the deck is shuffled, and a new spell is returned back to you. So you're going to be constantly returning these cards back, but you're always going to have access to at least one spell, or one copy of that spell at any point in time. And you can also not have multiple copies of the same spell at any point in time. I should note that as well. So in short, spells are very powerful and very useful, but are really dangerous and kind of unreliable. So use them sparingly, but use them when you feel safe. Or when you feel the least safe, I guess is probably more appropriate.
Alright, so now I'm going to go over the keeper part of the turn. So the keeper has 5 phases that he has to conduct, and they are in order: Investigator's Trade, Gain Threat, Keeper Action, Monster Attack, and Event. Now, the Investigator's Trade, it's not really a keeper thing, but it is kind of lumped in there just for, when it happens in the turn, for ease. And basically, if investigators are in the same space, and they do have to be in the same space, not just the same room, then they can actually trade items freely at this point. You can only trade key, equipment, weapon, artifact, ally, and tome cards. Anything else is not possible. And as previously mentioned, stunned investigators may now remove one of their stun tokens. Next up is Gain Threat. So the keeper gains threat equal to the number of investigators that started the game. Investigators that are eliminated still generate threat. So in this case, Ken is going to be generating 1 threat every turn because there is only 1 investigator. Unused threat is actually carried over between turns, so the keeper can actually build up threat to use higher cost cards and actions later on. And next up is actually the keeper action, and here the keeper performs his actions, generally spending threat to do so. So any movement that he gets to do with his monsters, it follows pretty much the same movement rules as investigators, except that monsters can actually ignore obstructions and locks. The keeper hand limit is 4 trauma and 4 mythos cards. Exceeding this limit, the keeper must discard down immediately. Monster attack is actually pretty straightforward. Monsters in the same space as investigators must attack, and again, it has to be the same space, not just the same room. A monster can only attack 1 investigator a round, so the keeper gets to choose there. Stun monsters, as mentioned previously, cannot attack, but they can instead remove one stun token at the end of this step. And again, combat in this situation pretty much follows the same basic steps as with investigators. So you would draw from the appropriate deck. So again, if there's a Chthonian, then you would draw from the Eldritch Horrors deck. And the second part of the card is used, the one that says Monster Attacks, instead of the top part. In this case, instead of having different types of weapons, it's different statuses. So basically, there's cards that say Monster versus Barrier, like this one. So that would be the one used if the monster is attacking a barrier that the investigator has barricaded a room with. And finally is the event step. Now during this step, the keeper basically adds 1 time token to the top of the event deck. If this actually causes the number of tokens to equal the number at the bottom of the top card of the deck, then all of the time is discarded. The event card is immediately resolved based on whatever the keeper's story choices are. And it should be noted that it's very, very important that the keeper remembers this, because this is their main way of advancing the story. These event cards are usually not good things for the investigators, so you want to make sure that you keep the pressure up. So next I'm just going to go over trauma cards very briefly. So as noted before, there are two types of trauma cards. There are injuries and insanities. Injuries can be played on investigators that have taken damage, and insanities can be played on investigators that take sanity damage or horror. Each investigator can only have one injury and one insanity card at a time, so if a new one is gained, the previous one's lost. So that's something the keeper has to kind of keep in mind. And in addition, some traumas can only be played when the investigator is at, or less than, a certain value of health or sanity. And that will be indicated on the card. Next up is Mythos cards. Now, Mythos cards can only be played on the investigator's turn. They usually have special conditions, and they generally require that threat is played. This is kind of one of the ways that the keeper can actually meddle in the investigator's turn, and it can be pretty devastating. So, as the keeper, you're going to want to try and have as many Mythos cards as possible, because these are sort of your bag of tricks. These are the things you can do that the investigators aren't going to know about ahead of time, so you can kind of, surprise them. Next, I'm going to go over the map features. So there's a few different features. I'm just going to go over each one briefly. First of all is the altar, and there is one in this scenario. They're used for various things. Usually the scenario will specifically say what it's used for. So, just watch the book for that. Next up is barriers. So again, we have a barrier here. Investigators can actually spend an action to put the barrier on a door or to remove one. And investigators and monsters cannot move through barriers, though they can attack them. So again, this is essentially barricading the door so that a monster can't get at you. There are campfire tokens that are used in some scenarios. These are used by the keeper to spread fires, so to set rooms on fire, or by investigators to destroy corpses if they need to do so. Consequently, there are also corpse tokens, and these are used by the keeper for various effects, usually something like making zombies, and they can be moved by the investigators during their movement phase. There are hiding spaces, which are essentially little trunks that the investigators can crawl into to hide from monsters. This can be done as a movement step, and investigators cannot move, attack, or use spells while hiding. So they can't really do much. They just sit there and hope that the monsters pass them by. Some scenarios will also have ladders in them, and any investigator or humanoid monster, and that's the ones with the blue icons, can actually treat spaces with ladders in them as adjacent for the purposes of movement. So you can't fire through ladders if you have a ranged weapon, but you can move between those areas. There are also vents, and vents are essentially the same as ladders, but they can only be used by beast monsters, and that's the brown monsters. So again, spaces with vents are treated as adjacent for beast monsters. Next up is puzzles, which is kind of one of the unique things about this game. So there are three types of puzzles. There is wiring, lock, and rune puzzles. So when setting up a puzzle, well, except for rune puzzles, there will usually be a main piece and a stack of puzzle tiles, like these. Typically, when instructed to do so, you place the indicated main piece down, shuffle the puzzle tiles, and set up the puzzle with random puzzle tile pieces. And these are usually face down at first. The exception to this is rune puzzles, where all of the tiles are used, so they're just shuffled and essentially put into the appropriate configuration. So for example, an initial setup for a wiring puzzle might look something like this. Now there are different goals for each type of puzzle, basically. So for example, with the wiring puzzle, there is something labeled start and something labeled end. And you have to be able to trace a path from the start to the end using the connected wires. It's very important to note here that there are two different colors of wires. There are red and there are blue. And a connection does not count unless the same colored wire is being used. So in this case, the start wire is red, but the connecting wire here is blue. So this connection doesn't count until a red wire is used to connect it. Now, in order to solve these puzzles, investigators get puzzle actions based on their intellect. So in this case, Joe Diamond has 5 intellect, so he's going to get 5 puzzle actions. And they can actually use a skill point to add their luck to their intellect before they attempt the puzzle to get some extra actions. So there are 3 basic puzzle actions. First of all is swap. To swap, you swap the position of 2 adjacent tiles, like this. The orientation must remain the same, so you can't rotate them at the same time. Second, you can choose to rotate the tile 90 degrees. Again, this is one action. And finally, you can choose to simply draw a new tile from the stack and replace any one tile in the puzzle with it. This costs 2 puzzle actions. As soon as the puzzle is completed, the puzzle is discarded and whatever caused the puzzle to come into play is satisfied. And this is typically an obstacle, so usually the obstacle card is going to be discarded. So I already told you about wiring puzzles. Lock puzzles are completed when all adjacent symbols match, and rune puzzles are completed when the picture is complete. Now, puzzles can be very easy to abuse by the investigators. Generally, we kind of hope that everyone's playing in the spirit of the game, but just in case, the following rules should be enforced. First of all, anytime a puzzle action is used, it cannot be undone as soon as a piece is altered, unless the player spends another puzzle action doing so. So they can't just, screw around and try out different configurations. As soon as they move a piece, that is an action. If any investigator that is not currently attempting the puzzle offers advice where pieces go, reset the puzzle. The other investigators are not there, they are not able to help the player who is currently attempting the puzzle. So if they give any input whatsoever, the puzzle should be reset. Finally, we get to ending the game. Now, the end of the game is based entirely on the Keeper's secret objective and the event deck. The players must generally find all of the clues to reveal the objective, or the event deck may reveal the objective for the players. If that happens, though, they're probably in pretty bad straits because they haven't been pacing themselves enough. Now, the investigators may win, the keeper may win, or both may lose. It is not, however, possible for both to win. And finally, at this point, I just want to go over a few pro tips that me and Ken have figured out as we've played this game. So, first of all, having the investigators set up the board before they do anything else is important, because the keeper has to do things on the board, so obviously it's important that it's there. So, make sure that the investigators do that. Second, use some sort of token to note that the investigators have taken their turn. The best way that we've found is that once the keeper has done their turn, they just hand each player 1 threat. Once the player has actually done their turn, they hand the keeper the threat back. So this is a good way of keeping track, since the investigators don't go in a set order. If you use this method, combine the time tokens with the threat to make sure that you don't forget to advance the time, because again, very important for the keeper. And finally, we just want to go over a couple of variant ideas. So this is a very scenario-based game, and so it has a lot of variability built into it. You're not going to be using all the components every game. It really depends on the story. And one of the great things about this is you can make your own story. But you should note, if you try to do so, that the scenarios are actually pretty intricate / balanced, so just make sure that yours are keeping things fair and keeping your players guessing. Because, you don't want it weighted too much in the keeper's favor, because otherwise the players are not going to like it, they're not going to have any fun. Alright, that's it. Let's go into example turns.
So now we're going to do the example turns for Mansions of Madness. As a note, we're probably just going to do one whole example turn. So Jason's going to do his investigator step, and then I'm going to do my keeper step. This is simply being done for 2 reasons. 1, so you can get a basic idea on how things flow, and 2, we don't want to get too far into the game because the game is heavily scenario and clue and hint based, and we don't really want to just give everything away for you guys right off the bat. So if we can, we might include an additional turn, but don't just expect that this is going to be fairly short. So we begin the game. I've already claimed my 1 Mythos card and my 1 threat from the very beginning of the game, from when we did the setup phase for the Keeper. So we start the game with the Investigator. So Jason, you are the only player. I'm going to give you a piece of threat, and you can give that back to me when you're done.
Alright. So, to start the Investigator's turn, I choose to let myself go first. Now, having played this once or twice, I do know that it's very important for the Investigators to move things along as quickly as possible. So, in this case, I kind of got a clue at the start saying that something was burning. That kind of indicates that maybe I should be checking the kitchen. So, I could explore this room and see what's in there, but I think it's more important that I move towards the kitchen. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 1 movement action to move here. I'm going to take my second movement to move here. And at this point I could either choose to use my action to spend another movement and move over here. It's probably not necessary though, because I'll be able to get into the kitchen next turn anyway. So at this point I think I'm going to explore this room and see what's here. So at this point all of the exploration cards that are in there are going to be revealed one at a time.
And that is my job. So, the first card is, you find nothing of interest. So I'm just going to take that back from you. And there are no further cards.
Alright, so in this case I've used my 2 movement to move 2 spaces. I have used my action, so threat goes back. All of the Investigators are out of threat. That means that it is now the Keeper's turn.
So I take that threat and add it to my collection. So I now have 2 threat. And now just going through my steps. First we have the Investigator trading step. Jason is the only player, so I guess we can pretty much ignore this step for the most part, except that if he is ever stunned, obviously he's going to need to remove his stun tokens at that point in time.
Actually, in this case, I would like to give my 45 automatics to myself.
Oh, you'd like to trade yourself for your 45 automatics?
Yes.
Okay. So the 45 automatics are now holding Joe Diamond. And we're going to go on to the gain threat step, which I have already accomplished by taking that threat in from when Jason gave it back to me after the end of his turn. So now I get to spend threat based on my Keeper actions and my various Mythos cards. And yeah, so most good Keepers will note Evil Presence is a very good way to start off the game. So, Evil Presence allows me to draw, so I'm going to take my 1 Mythos card in the hand here. Evil Presence allows me to draw 1 Mythos card and 1 Trauma card. And that costs 1 threat to do. Since there's not really a whole lot else going on right now, I could choose to just end my turn and gain that threat back as part of Evil Presence's card. And yeah, I think I will do that. Seems like the logical thing to do. So I'm going to end my Keeper action step. So next is the monster's attack step. There are currently no monsters, and therefore none to attack. And finally we have the event step. I take 1 time token and put it on top of the event deck. Since the top card of the event deck has a 3, that means there's going to be 3 tokens that have to be placed on there before it's revealed. So we're still good for there for now. And that's the end of the Keeper phase.
Alright, since that was relatively uneventful, we can probably go through another example turn here. So, again, it's going to start with the Investigators here, so I'll take my threat coupon.
Here's your threat coupon, sir.
Thank you. So, again, Joe Diamond is going first. So, it's probably a good idea to go into the kitchen. So, again, I'm going to use 1 movement to move here, and then 1 movement to move into the kitchen. And finally, I'm going to use my action to explore.
Now, before you do that, I am actually going to use 1 threat to play the Mythos card, Plunged into Darkness.
Oh no!
The room gets very cold as the lights become blindingly bright. Your ears pop and every light in the room burns out. Place a darkness token in the Investigator's room. So the kitchen is now a dark room. Because of that, this means that Jason, in order to take an exploration action, must actually use a movement step, and and his action to actually explore that room. And this means that essentially I've stopped him from being able to explore that room.
Alright, well I guess that's pretty much all I can do then.
You could continue moving. You could use your action for other things as well.
Well, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of point right now, so I guess I'll just end my turn.
Successfully stopping Jason from foiling my plot. I'm going to take that threat back from him. Again, we ignore the investigator's trade step because, well, again, Jason's going to trade his 45 automatics with himself once more. And then I've gained my threat from Jason, as before. And I'm going to use Evil Presence once more. So I'm going to spend one threat to draw a Mythos card and an injury card. And I'm going to choose to end my turn to gain that threat back. So that ends the Keeper action step. We go into the monster's attack step, which again, there obviously are no monsters. And then we go to the event step. So that's going to be one more token on top. And now it's Jason's turn once more.
And again, that was pretty quick, so I guess we can get in a third one. Alright, so I'll take my coupon.
One threat coupon.
Thank you. So, at this point, the room's dark, so I have to spend a movement and an action to actually explore it. I guess I'll do so now, so I'll still have one movement in reserve.
So before you do that, actually, I'm going
goody.
to use What's for Dinner? The requirement must be that you are in the dining room or the kitchen, and you are, of course, in the kitchen. I'm going to get you to test your willpower, but +1.
Alright, so Joe Diamond's willpower is actually 7, so that means I have to test against an 8. So this shouldn't be too difficult. We'll see, though. I got a 4.
On a failure, you took damage in horror, but on a pass, nothing happens, so you're fine.
Yay!
My attempts to thwart you have gone unsuccessful now.
Alright, so in that case, I'm going to continue on with the exploration.
So the first card I reveal is Clue 3A. Alright, Matches of Madness! Woo!
Yeah, so one thing I really love about this, and actually it's one thing that Fantasy Flight's kind of been doing lately, is, you know, they kind of get these universes going. So they've got, you know, the sort of the realms of Terranoth, which is their fantasy thing. This is kind of their horror thing. They also have Android, which is their sci-fi. But yeah, I really like that there's a lot of continuity between these games. I mean, the characters from Arkham Horror are actually in this game.
Yep.
With, you know, the same backstories and everything. So I really like the whole continuity of that, so that it feels like it's part of a bigger story, which is really neat.
And that is really something that Fantasy Flight Games does, like, completely nail on the head. Like, if you don't like anything else about them, this is something that they do. They're really good at, like, combining things together and actually having, like, universes rather than just a nebulous of games. As always, as I often point out with things, and as always with Fantasy Flight Games, blah, too many FFs in this world, really.
Or not enough.
Or not enough, maybe, yeah. Maybe if there was more, it'd be easier to distinguish. Talking. So, the art in this game is spectacular. It's, as always, it is absolutely fantastic. I can say no wrong about it. In addition to that, the miniatures themselves, the plastic miniatures, are absolutely spectacular. There was actually, I'm not sure, Jason, if you remember this coming up, but when this game was actually delayed originally because the plastic miniatures that were originally coming out for the first printing of it, Fantasy Flight, I don't know who chose to do this, if it was the game designer or if it was like just a quality control department or something. They actually looked at the plastic figures and said, no, those aren't good enough, we're going to try again.
Yeah.
And that was pretty spectacular. Like, they had to push this back a little while because of that, and that's all right with me, because they look great. I spent some time actually painting up a couple of them. I'm really, really proud of my Shoggoth. I thought that I was trying to capture the painting scheme of their Arkham Horror, like the pictures that they have in Arkham Horror sort of style. So I was trying to go with that painting scheme. And, yeah, so I mean, like, the miniatures not being painted for some people could be a big issue, but honestly, for me, if you're a miniature hobbyist like myself, or even Jason, you've been getting into this more and more lately as well
A
too.
little bit, yeah.
And yeah, I mean, if you like painting miniatures, this really isn't a bad thing at all. They're sweet miniatures.
So one of the major things for me with this game is sort of the replayability, and like this is something that always gets me with games that have individual scenarios, because let's face facts. After a while, you get really tired of the same ones if you played them a few times. Now that could still happen with this, but at the same time, because there are actually the story options, it does provide a little bit of variability within the scenario. So even if all the players have played a scenario, several times before, they wouldn't necessarily know which options that the keeper has chosen. They might not have seen them all yet. So, it keeps it relatively fresh, which, I really appreciate.
And one of the big advantages, too, with the way that they've done this scenario-based content, they've made this game very modular. So you get this... they've already released, I believe, 3 or 4 single scenarios.
Thereabouts, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's 5 scenarios with the basic game. I believe it's 5. And then there's an expansion that I do actually have, which I'm sure you might have noticed some of the expansion bits in there. That comes with 3 more scenarios, I believe. And so, like, that's all fine and dandy. Like, you've gotten this big book with more scenarios. But they've actually released individual scenarios. So, similar to, like, their living card game, or like these other modular games that they're making, you can literally just drop 10 or I think it's maybe $15.
Thereabouts, yeah, it's pretty cheap.
On these print-on-demand scenarios, and that scenario has literally everything you need as far as cards-wise to actually go at it. Their exploration cards, I believe, because they're using this print-on-demand service rather than their usual printing service, they note that the cards actually do look different, like the backs and such, from the regular standard cards. However, they've included all the basic cards that you need. So rather than using your basic items from your regular sets, you just use all the cards that are included with it, and then like the bigger cards and such you add on top of that and such.
Yeah.
But yeah, like they've done this really fantastic thing with their scenarios where they've made it modular, so much so that like whenever I play games like this, I always want to kind of make my own scenarios. But to be honest, I have ideas for scenarios I'd want to make, but I'm still running through all these scenarios. And I mean, there's so many options with each one of them that it's like, you know what this kind of reminds me of? This reminds me of what Betrayal could have been.
Yeah, if they'd actually continued on with it.
Yeah, because they could have just like once a year just put out like another little expansion that was like 1 or 2 extra scenarios with a couple more extra cards that come with it for maybe like $10 or so a pop. Mm-hmm. And then voila, like you finally have like a little bit of progression on with these characters that are just going through this random mansion and such. Mansions of Madness is, I don't know, like I kind of feel like it's some sort of spiritual successor to Betrayal at the House on the Hill, even though they're like, I don't think that the design team was in any way related.
Well, no, I kind of felt the same way, and that's actually the way I've described it to a couple of people. Is that it's kind of like Betrayal at House on the Hill, but and it really is. It's a very similar genre, but they've really expanded on a lot of things, and they've really provided that modularity, that replayability. Not to say that Betrayal isn't replayable.
Oh, no, not at all.
But I think there's a lot more promise in this, and they're actually continuing to expand it, which is a big thing.
Yeah, especially since I believe we touched on this in the actual Arkham Horror review that we did for about Christmas time. It seems as though Arkham Horror has sort of run its course with Fantasy Flight to an extent. I don't suspect we'll see any more expansions for it so far. I mean, as I say this, I'm sure there's probably a Fantasy Flight article I overlooked that there's like, here's the next little box expansion, but I kind of feel like they're done with it. Because they've got this one and they put out Elder Sign in the same year, and I feel like this and Elder Sign are sort of the way of the future. Elder Sign is a game that we haven't done yet, but I'm sure that knowing our track record with Lovecraftian horror-based games, I'm sure that that's coming up for...
Someday.
Exactly. But yeah, Mansions of Madness, I think that overall we're fairly excited about this game. I always loved playing this, and it has similar flaws though to Arkham though. In terms of the scope of the game, setup and putting back is kind of choresome at times.
Although, it is a lot better than Arkham Horror. There are a lot. You will probably have noticed there are a lot less decks. a lot less
Yes.
pieces. So it's
I
it's
don't
not
know.
to that level.
It kind of gives Arkham Horror a run for its money as far as decks go.
I don't know. I still think that Mansion of Madness is a lot less work.
I would probably agree with that. The only thing that I've ever found that kind of bugs me in this game is the initial setup with the Keeper. I find that the initial setup with the Keeper tends to drag a little bit. And that's why it's really important that the investigator side don't even look at the investigator options until they set up the board. After they set up the board, then they can go and have fun and play with the rest of the stuff. So the Keeper can throw all this... so that the Keeper can throw down all the rest of their things. If the investigators don't do that, then the game's setup tends to drag. Also, good God, this game sometimes can be a chore to put back. I'm not sure how much you saw of my organizational system for this box during the review, but man, this took me a while to actually get down. Oh man, so much work.
Yeah, and it only took about 200 bags.
Oh, somewhere around 200 bags.
Yeah.
A little bit.
It's all good, Ken. It's all good.
Yeah. But, I mean, this game is fantastic. If you like Fantasy Flight's gigantic games, this is one for the list.
Yeah.
All right, Mansion of the Madness. Jason, what do you think?
Personally, I'm going to give this a 4.5. I really, really enjoy this game. I really like the idea, the concept. It's probably not one of my favorite games, mostly because it is a little hefty and it's harder to get people into, but still, it's pretty close for me. It really is. How about you, Ken? What do you think?
4.5 out of 5. It's not a perfect game. The game itself is kind of rough in terms of its setup and its put down time. But when you play this game, it is spectacular. It's really fun. It's so heavy in theme. If you and your group like to actually get into character and such, this game is perfect for you. And really, you actually feel like you're playing through stories in the Lovecraftian mythos, as opposed to with Arkham Horror, which is still a fantastic game, but it just sort of feels like you're just nebulously sort of dealing with a whole bunch of stories rather than one. With this, you really get down and dirty into one story and investigating it, and it does a really good job of that.
Yep.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to give us a grand total of 9 meeples. I'd say this game deserves no less.
Absolutely. So that's it for today. Join us next time for Irisel.
See you later, and have good games.